Are you able to see my screen, all of you?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
अच्छा ಶುರು ಮಾಡೋಣ. ಬುಕ್ಕು ಪೆನ್ನು ಇಟ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿ. We will first start with a review of what we did in the last two classes. We spoke about the torque on a current loop in a uniform magnetic field. Now, what do you mean by uniform? A magnetic field that has constant value and direction in the region in which the field exists. So if you consider, for example, we took a rectangular coil of length L and breadth B, and if there is a current I flowing through this coil, we can define the magnetic moment of this coil as area of the coil multiplied by current if it is one turn. If the coil has n turns, then the magnetic moment would be n into A into I. It's a magnetic moment. So what we derived was that if you keep such a rectangular coil carrying current in a uniform magnetic field, the coil will experience a torque. And the torque is given by the formula M cross B. Now if you expand the cross product of M and B, it will be M into B into sine theta, where theta is the angle between the magnetic moment vector and the magnetic field vector. Incidentally, one can also think of theta as the angle between the perpendicular to the plane of the coil and the magnetic field B. So in this diagram we have shown the perpendicular to the magnetic field by this vector n cap. You should remember that the magnetic moment vector will also be in the same direction as n cap. So if you expand this formula, mb sine theta, by substituting for m as n into I into a, you get this formula tau equal to niab sine theta. So this is the torque. This torque has a turning effect on the coil. So I hope you will remember this. We derived this in the previous class. Tau equal to NAIB sine theta. The most important point to remember is theta is the angle between the normal to the plane of the coil and the magnetic field B. Like I mentioned in the previous class, in some problems, what will happen is you will be given the angle made by the magnetic field with the plane of the coil. Now in this formula, theta is the angle made by the magnetic field with the normal to the plane of the coil or with the direction of m. Suppose you are given the angle made by the magnetic field with the plane of the coil, that is this angle, which we can call as alpha. Then how to get theta? We had told this in the last class. Theta would be equal to 90 minus alpha. 90 minus alpha. Understood? Some response.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now there are a couple of points I want to remark regarding the formula that we derived. Tau equal to NAIB sine theta. Now A refers to the area of the coil, and depending on the context of the problem and depending on the shape of the coil, the area has to be calculated by different formulae. For instance, if it is a square coil of side x, then the area would be x squared. On the other hand, if it's a rectangular coil of length L and breadth B, then the area would be length into breadth. If it's a circular loop of radius r, then the area is pi r squared. In this context, there is one interesting observation I would like to make. For a given perimeter, What is a perimeter? Perimeter is the sum of the length of the sides of the coil. So for example, the perimeter of a square of side x is 4x. The perimeter of a rectangle of length L and breadth B would be 2 times L plus B. And the perimeter of a circle of radius R is 2 pi R. Now if you have coils of same perimeter, then one can show mathematically that the area would be maximum for a circle. You understand what I am telling? For a given perimeter, the circle will have the largest area. Therefore, if you have 3 coils, all of them having the same perimeter, carrying the same current, kept in the same magnetic field, then the torque experienced by the circular loop will be maximum. Because for the same perimeter, the area A is maximum for a circle. This is one important observation that I need to make, and this is important when you solve problems in 2-mark questions and 1-mark question. You can get this question that for a given perimeter, which shape will have the maximum area? Circle will have the maximum area, and therefore torque on a circular loop will be maximum compared to other coils having the same perimeter carrying the same current. Now the second point I want to make is, we have been talking of uniform magnetic field. So when you put a current loop in a uniform magnetic field, it's important to remember that there is no net force on the coil. If there is a force acting on the coil, then the coil will be accelerated. So we are not talking about force. In a uniform magnetic field, when a current loop is placed in a uniform magnetic field, there is no net force on the coil, but there will be a torque. Of course, the value of the torque will depend on the orientation of the coil in the field. So as mentioned here, in a uniform magnetic field, a current loop experiences no net magnetic force, but it may or may not experience a torque. Why may or may not? Because torque is given by NAIB sine theta, and suppose theta equal to 0. Now theta equal to 0 means what? The angle made by the magnetic field with the normal to the field. If that angle is 0, so if you go back to the first slide, if this angle theta is 0, that means if the magnetic field is in the plane of the coil itself, isn't it? If the magnetic field is in the plane of the coil itself, then what will happen? If the magnetic field is perpendicular to the plane of the coil, if the magnetic field is perpendicular to the plane of the coil, theta will become 0. If theta is equal to 0, tau will be 0. So this tau may act or may not act depending on the angle theta. So as I have said here, if theta equal to 0, tau is 0. But if theta has any other value between 0 to 90 degree, then tau will not be equal to 0. It will have a particular value. Maximum value, of course, will happen when theta is 90. When theta is exactly equal to 90 degree, then the torque is simply NAIB. So the point I am trying to make is the following, that if in a uniform magnetic field you have a current loop, then that current loop in a uniform magnetic field will not experience any magnetic force. However, it will experience a torque. This torque will depend on the angle at which the coil or the loop is inclined in the field. The next point I want to make, we will not elaborate on this. We will consider this much later in our chapter. If you consider a non-uniform magnetic field, then the current loop will experience a net magnetic force in a non-uniform magnetic field. Of course, our discussion now is not about non-uniform magnetic field, so we will not go into this situation for the time being. In addition to experiencing a net magnetic field, it may again, like the previous case, may or may not experience a torque. So for your reference, as far as your understanding of this chapter is required, you have to really understand only this part. In a uniform magnetic field, a current loop will experience a torque, and this torque will depend on the angle theta, among other things. It will of course also depend on the area of the coil, the current in the coil, the field, etc. But mainly it will depend on theta for a given coil carrying a particular current in a particular magnetic field. And you should remember the formula for this torque, which is N A B I sin theta. Always remember what is theta. Theta is the angle made by the normal to the plane of the coil with the magnetic field, or theta is the angle between the magnetic moment vector, which will always be perpendicular to the plane of the coil or normal to the plane of the coil, and the magnetic field B. So the last point is what we are going to discuss today. Now, this torque acting on a current loop which is placed in a magnetic field is the principle for the construction of what is called as galvanometers, or more correctly known as moving coil galvanometer. So as I have written in this note, the principle of torque acting on a current loop which is placed in a uniform magnetic field is used in the construction of a moving coil galvanometer. We did discuss galvanometer 1 or 2 classes prior to this, right? So I will recall this. When you talk about galvanometers, there are 2 types of galvanometers. One is called deadbeat galvanometer. The other is called ballistic galvanometer. In our syllabus, we will describe and discuss in detail the ballistic galvanometer. As far as deadbeat galvanometer is concerned, we will have to only remember the conditions under which a ballistic galvanometer can become a deadbeat galvanometer. So what am I trying to tell? I am trying to tell you that when you consider a galvanometer, there are 2 types of galvanometer. One is called deadbeat galvanometer, the other is called ballistic galvanometer. So today we will be discussing this ballistic galvanometer. By the way, what is deadbeat galvanometer? I have shown here. A deadbeat galvanometer, first of all, is used to measure current. It is used to measure constant current. The most important point is, in a deadbeat galvanometer, when a constant current flows through it, the coil will deflect and stay deflected in a constant position. The galvanometer will give a steady deflection when a constant current is passed through it. And this deflection theta will be proportional to the current I that is passed through it. And hence, we can calibrate the scale of the galvanometer to measure current directly. Now, in terms of construction, the rectangular coil will be wound on a metallic frame in the case of a deadbeat galvanometer. Why it should be wound on a metallic frame? I will discuss this after I discuss the ballistic galvanometer. For the time being, it is enough to understand that when you wind a coil on a metallic frame, as soon as the current is passed through the coil and the coil deflects, there will be a large amount of damping which will come into effect because of what is called Faraday's law of electromagnetic induction. Don't worry about it right now. Because of this induction effect, the coil will come to stop immediately as soon as the current passes through it, and will remain in that turned position or in the deflected position so long as the current keeps flowing through it. So the main point therefore is that as far as construction is concerned, a deadbeat galvanometer will have the coil wound on a metallic frame. The second most important thing is, when you pass a steady current through a deadbeat galvanometer, the coil will not oscillate. That we already mentioned in the first point actually. The galvanometer will give a steady deflection, constant steady deflection. The coil will not oscillate. Now, most of the times when you construct a deadbeat galvanometer, the coil is pivoted or fixed between two springs most of the time. Sometimes the coil is also suspended by a string. The string is usually a metallic string. So in the case of coils that are suspended in magnetic fields, such galvanometers are called suspended coil galvanometers. Now, if a suspended coil galvanometer has to act as a deadbeat galvanometer, then the suspension wire must be a thick wire such that the moment of inertia of the system is small. The reasons for all these points you will understand after I describe ballistic galvanometer, and then I will compare the ballistic galvanometer with the deadbeat galvanometer. That time you will understand why the coil has to be wound on a metallic frame, why the coil will not oscillate, why should the suspension wire be thick and the moment of inertia should be very small. Finally, one more condition required for a deadbeat galvanometer is that when you use this galvanometer in a circuit, there will be the resistance of the coil itself as well as there will be resistance of the circuit. The total resistance of the circuit in which the galvanometer is connected must generally be small in the case of a deadbeat galvanometer. So when one of the questions you can get is what are the conditions for a galvanometer to be deadbeat? The three important conditions are that the coil must be wound on a metallic frame, the coil must be suspended by a thick wire such that the moment of inertia of the system is very small, and thirdly, the resistance of the circuit where the coil is where the galvanometer is used must be also small. We will see this later. Today's lesson is mainly on what is called as suspended coil galvanometer. Here we have shown a simple schematic diagram of the construction of a suspended coil ballistic galvanometer. So today's lesson is on this concept called ballistic galvanometer. The first point you need to understand is what is a ballistic galvanometer and how is it different from a deadbeat galvanometer. A ballistic galvanometer is used to measure transient current or charge. What is the meaning of transient current? Current that flows for a very short interval of time. Transient current means current that flows for an extremely short duration of time. So when a current flows for a very short duration of time, for that interval, a certain amount of charge will flow through the galvanometer. So we will see that the deflection produced in this galvanometer is proportional to that charge. So a ballistic galvanometer basically measures, either you can say it measures a transient current, or the more correct way of telling is it measures charge. It should be or, transient current or charge. While in the case of a deadbeat galvanometer, it measures current. So first difference between deadbeat galvanometer and ballistic galvanometer is the deadbeat galvanometer measures current while the ballistic galvanometer measures the charge that flows through the coil. The second thing is, in the case of a ballistic galvanometer, I will come back to the construction a bit later. In the case of a ballistic galvanometer, as the transient current passes through it or as the charge passes through it, the galvanometer will not give a steady deflection. On the other hand, it will start to oscillate. Remember, in the deadbeat galvanometer we said the galvanometer will give a steady deflection and it will not oscillate. But in the case of ballistic galvanometer, it will oscillate. And we can measure these oscillations, period of oscillation, etc. And we will see that in the theory of this galvanometer. The third important point or the difference is that, remember, in the deadbeat galvanometer I said that the coil is wound on a metallic frame. In this case, the coil is wound on a non-metallic frame, wooden frame or plastic frame or bakelite frame and so on. This will prevent the damping. We will understand it later. So to reiterate the fact once more, A ballistic galvanometer is used to measure the charge that passes through the galvanometer in a short interval of time. The ballistic galvanometer does not give a steady deflection. On the other hand, it gives you an oscillatory motion. The ballistic galvanometer is wound on a non-metallic frame. Then, in the case of a ballistic galvanometer, the suspension wire will not be thick, it will be very thin, such that the moment of inertia of this entire system will be very large. We will understand the reason for this after we discuss the theory. I am just listing out the 5 or 6 major differences between ballistic galvanometer and deadbeat galvanometer. This itself can be a 4-mark question. Distinguish between a ballistic galvanometer and a deadbeat galvanometer. So you should make 2 columns. In one column you should write these 6 points for deadbeat galvanometer. In the other column you should write these 6 points for the ballistic galvanometer. And of course, the resistance of the circuit in which the galvanometer is connected should be large. So these are the major points regarding a ballistic galvanometer. Now coming to the construction of the ballistic galvanometer, as shown in this figure, the ballistic galvanometer consists of a rectangular coil which is marked as PQRS, which is wound on a non-metallic frame which is not shown here, and this coil is suspended by a wire. This wire is made of an alloy called phosphor bronze. This wire is attached to what is called a torsional head, which is basically a screw which can be turned. Incidentally, the torsional head T1 to which the suspension wire is attached will also serve as the terminal to take the current into the coil. So we have not shown the circuit. For example, you can have a cell here and you can have a plug key here, and circuit will be completed like this. If you switch on this key and switch off, just switch it on and switch it off momentarily, then there will be a momentary current that will pass through the coil. That current will be taken into the coil through this torsion head T1. It will flow through the coil, come out to the bottom part through the spring, I will explain that, and then it will come out through the second torsion head T2 and go back into the circuit. So these torsion heads that you have, which they are what are known as torsion heads, are basically screws. So coming to the construction, I will explain the construction completely now. The ballistic galvanometer consists of a rectangular coil as shown in this figure, which is PQRS, which is wound on a non-metallic frame and suspended by a phosphor bronze wire. The phosphor bronze wire is attached to a torsion head T1. The other end of the coil is connected to a spring, and the spring is attached to another torsion head T2. So basically the whole coil, as you can see here, the whole coil is suspended. It is hung within a magnetic field. Now I have to tell a few things about the magnetic field. The magnetic field that we have here is called a radial magnetic field. That means the 2 poles that you see, North Pole and South Pole, they are not separate. Remember, it is part of one horseshoe magnet. We have not shown the entire magnet. In fact, you should have in your mind that this whole thing is one magnet. It is one magnet like that. And between this horseshoe magnet, the pole pieces are curved pieces, and there is also an soft iron core which is kept within the frame of the coil. As a result of this, what will happen? I will explain this separately in the next class. Because of this arrangement, the magnetic field between the pole pieces, or rather the magnetic field in the region where the coil is suspended, will be what is known as a radial magnetic field. This magnetic field is called a radial magnetic field. What do you mean by radial magnetic field is that in whichever position the coil comes to rest within this magnetic field, wherever you take, the magnetic field lines will always be such that it is perpendicular to the length of the coil and parallel to the breadth of the coil. So therefore, the angle theta between the normal to the plane of the coil and the magnetic field B will always be 90 degree. We have to have a separate discussion on this. For the time being, just understand that as far as construction of the ballistic galvanometer is concerned, I will explain it like this. A ballistic galvanometer consists of a rectangular coil of length L and breadth B, which is wound on a non-metallic frame and suspended by a phosphor-bronze wire. The phosphor-bronze wire is attached to a torsion head, which will also serve as the terminal for taking the current into the coil. The bottom end of the coil is connected to a spring, and the spring is again attached to another torsional head T2, which will take the current out of the coil. The coil is suspended between the pole pieces of a horseshoe magnet, and also you have a soft iron core which is kept inside the frame of this coil. As a result of this special arrangement, the magnetic field is radial in the region between the north and south pole. A radial magnetic field means in any position of the coil, the angle theta, which is the angle between the normal to the plane of the coil and the magnetic field, will always be 90 degrees. This will help us a lot because the torque tau will now have NAIB sine theta, where theta is 90. So sine theta term will become 1. We will see that. Finally, the suspension wire, phosphor-bronze wire, also has a very small concave mirror attached to this. Now the purpose of this mirror is to measure the deflection of the coil. That will be again a separate topic I will take. How to measure the deflection. Because the moment the current passes through this coil, as you already would have guessed, the coil will turn because of the torque. As the coil turns, it will turn by an angle. So we need to measure by what angle the coil turns, because that angle through which the coil turns will be proportional to the current that passes through it for a short time, or will be proportional to the charge, right? So how do we measure this angle by which the coil turns? For this we use something called as lamp and scale arrangement. Lamp and scale arrangement. As part of this lamp and scale arrangement, we have a mirror attached to the coil. Okay, so we will worry about this later. We will not talk about how to measure the angle theta by which the coil turns right now. For the time being, we will only look at the construction and working of this system. So how does it work? What is the theory? So let's understand the theory once more. Let's understand the theory of this ballistic galvanometer. So I have drawn the picture once more here. You have on the left hand side, you have the schematic representation of the ballistic galvanometer. Let us look at the steps. They are very simple and straightforward. Let us assume that our coil has a length L, a breadth B, and number of turns N, small n, and it is placed in a uniform radial magnetic field. And let a current I flow through this coil for an interval of time t. T will be very small. So as a result of this current flowing through the coil, what's going to happen? You can guess. What will happen when a current flows through a coil suspended in a uniform magnetic field? Can anybody say what will happen to this coil when a current flows through the coil? Hello? So what is the effect when this current flows through this rectangular coil placed in a suspended in a uniform magnetic field? Hello? Nobody is there?
Yes, sir.
So what will happen to the coil when this current flows through it? What was our basic principle? What is it we have been talking about for the last half an hour? What did we do? What did we review today? I said review. First thing I said. What will happen? what will happen to a current loop which is placed in a uniform magnetic field? Suppose you have a loop like this, which is a coil, which is suspended in a uniform magnetic field. What will happen to that coil?
Experiences a torque.
It will experience a torque. I think nobody has had breakfast. It will experience a torque, isn't it? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
So this coil will experience a torque. That's all. So what is the torque value? What is the torque value?
NIAB sin theta.
Very good. It is NIAB sin theta. So the torque. So when a transient means current flowing for a short time. When a transient current passes through the coil will experience a torque which will try to deflect the coil, which will try to turn the coil. Therefore, this torque in this context is called deflecting torque. And that torque is NAIB sin theta. But where did sin theta go? Formula was NAIB sin theta. Why have I not written sin theta here?
Theta is 90 degrees.
Yes, theta is 90 degrees. Why is theta 90 degrees? Because the magnetic field is radial. Because magnetic field is radial, at any position of the coil, theta will always be 90 degrees. I will explain this with a picture later. So now for the time being, you assume what I am telling is correct. So therefore, the torque on this coil is NAIB. Sin 90 is 1. This torque will act for a short interval of time. Now when a torque acts on any system, it has a turning effect. And the turning effect will give rise to what is called impulse, angular impulse. Here you should know a little bit of mechanics. For linear motion, that means motion in a straight line, if a force acts on a body, then the force will create what is called linear impulse. Linear impulse. You know what is impulse? Impulse is nothing but change in momentum. Change in momentum. Okay. Now you want me to do first PUC lesson. Suppose there is a force acting on a body. Force will produce an acceleration. So F is equal to ma. But what is m? M is mass. What is a? Acceleration. So if this force is acting for a small time, say delta t, then the velocity of the body will change from u to v. So acceleration is v minus u by delta t. Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
When a force is acting on a body of mass m, what will it produce? It will produce an acceleration. What is acceleration? Acceleration is rate of change of velocity, right? So you are having a body which is moving with some constant velocity u, let us say. Now on this body, let us assume that there is a force F which is acting for a short interval of time delta t. So during this delta t, what will happen when the force is acting? The body's velocity will change. From u, the velocity will become v. So in this interval delta t, the velocity changes from u to v. This Newton's first law. Newton's second law actually. When a force acts on a body, it produces an acceleration. So the velocity changes from u to v. So what is the acceleration? How do you calculate the acceleration? Rate of change of velocity, v minus u by t. So v minus u by t, or in this case I have taken delta t, that is nothing but the acceleration. So I can write this, m into v minus u by t. Now, if I cross multiply this, f into delta t, force acting for a short interval delta t, that f into delta t is equal to how much? F into delta t will be, let me cross multiply here and write it again. F into delta t will be m into v minus u, or this is mv minus mu. What is m into v? M into v is final momentum. What is m into u? Initial momentum. ಅದು ಮರ್ತೋಗಿದ್ದೀರಾ? ಮೊಮೆಂಟಮ್ ಇಸ್ ಮಾಸ್ ಇಂಟು ವೆಲಾಸಿಟಿ. ಸೊ ಈ ಎಫ್ ಇಂಟು ಡೆಲ್ಟಾ ಟಿನ ಇಂಪಲ್ಸ್ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ, ಇದನ್ನ ಇಂಪಲ್ಸ್ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ. ಸೊ ವೆನ್ ಎವರ್ ಎ ಫೋರ್ಸ್ ಆಕ್ಟ್ಸ್ ಆನ್ ಎ ಬಾಡಿ, ಇಟ್ ವಿಲ್ ಕ್ರಿಯೇಟ್ ಅನ್ ಇಂಪಲ್ಸ್, and that impulse is nothing but force into time. That impulse is also numerically equal to change in the linear momentum of the body. This is for linear motion, andre body moving in a straight line. Now we are not discussing linear motion at all. We are not discussing linear motion at all. We are discussing angular motion, rotatory motion. For a rotatory motion, for a body to rotate, there must be a torque acting on the body. So when a torque acts on a body for a small interval of time delta t, it will produce what is called angular impulse, which is tau into delta t. And this angular impulse will be equal to change in angular momentum. Change in angular momentum. How do you calculate angular momentum of a body? If I is the moment of inertia of the body, and if omega is the angular velocity, then I into omega would be the angular momentum. So if omega 1 was the initial angular velocity, omega 2 is the final angular velocity, then change in angular momentum is I omega 2 minus I omega 1, or it is I into delta omega. So, okay, I believe all of you are just looking at stars now. You're not really understanding what I'm telling. ಸರ್ ನಾನು ಕ್ಲಾಸಲ್ಲಿ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ, ಆಮೇಲೆ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತೀನಿ. ಸೊ ವಾಟ್ ಐ ಆಮ್ ಟ್ರೈಂಗ್ ಟು ಟೆಲ್ ಇಸ್ ದಿಸ್. Suppose I have, okay, I will take some first view class for you. I have a body of mass m. It is moving with an initial velocity u. Let us assume that there is a force F acting on this body. It's a straight line. This is straight line motion. So because of this force, what will happen to the body is that it will increase its velocity to v. Let us assume this force is acting for a small time delta t. Then from Newton's second law we can say F is equal to mass of the body times acceleration of the body. Acceleration is v minus u by delta t. This is Newton's second law. This you learned from 8th standard. F is equal to ma. V minus u by delta t is a. So if I cross multiply this now, I will get F into delta t is equal to m into v minus m into u. This m into v minus m into u is nothing but change in momentum of the body. P is momentum of the body, linear momentum. So this F into delta t is called impulse. So the effect of a force is to create an impulse on the body. Impulse is nothing but change in momentum. This is for linear motion, straight line motion. Just like this, very similar to this, I have another situation, and that is, if I have a body which is suspended, if a torque is acting on this body tau, and if this torque acts for a time delta t, tau into delta t is also called impulse, but now it is called angular impulse. And this angular impulse is equal to change of angular momentum, not linear momentum. So change of angular momentum would be I into omega 2, which is final angular velocity is omega 2, minus I into omega 1, where omega 1 is the initial angular velocity. In rotatory motion, we don't use mass. The equivalent of mass in rotatory motion is moment of inertia. So I can write that any torque acting on a body will create an angular impulse. That angular impulse will give rise to a change in angular momentum, which I can write as I into delta omega. Okay, I assume that you know all this. So let us go back to the previous page. What we are telling is, when a transient current passes through the coil, it creates a deflection torque in the coil, and this torque will act for a short interval of time delta t and will give rise to an angular impulse. So let us calculate that angular impulse. That angular impulse is like this, tau into delta t. But what is tau? Tau is NABI, that is tau, into delta t, or I have written dt for small interval of time. I will not go beyond this step till at least 3 or 4 of you tell me that you have understood. We have not done anything new here. We are just doing what we already learned from PUC classes. Whenever a torque acts on a body for an interval of time delta t, it will create an angular impulse, and that angular impulse is nothing but tau into delta t. Tau into delta t or tau into dt is, tau is nothing but NAIB, that we already saw here, NAIB. I have used the symbol small letter I instead of capital I because this I is a small current flowing for a short interval of time. It's not a steady current for a fixed time. It's a momentary current. So instead of using capital I have used small I. That is all the difference I have made. That is tau. So if I multiply tau with dt, I will get the angular impulse, or I will get the angular impulse. Now, what is the total impulse? If this current flows for t units of time, then the total impulse will be tau dt integrated from 0 to t. So I'll do that. So the total impulse is, for tau dt, if I substitute, it is NABI dt. N is a constant, A is a constant, B is a constant. I take it out. So integral 0 to t I dt. But I dt is nothing but a small amount of charge dq that passes through the coil. Here you should know a little bit of Ohm's law. Why is current into time charge? Do you know? Current is nothing but rate of flow of charge dq by dt. Therefore, I into dt will be dq. So basically, in this time from 0 to t, when this current small I flows, it is equivalent to telling that integral 0 to t I dt is nothing but the charge q that flows through the coil. So another way to understand is, you can take I out of this integral. Integral dt is t. I into t is nothing but q. So all that we have done so far is, we have said that when a constant current I flows through this ballistic galvanometer, the current I will produce a torque tau or tau d, which is NAIB. Because of this torque, there is an impulse on the coil, angular impulse to be more precise, and this angular impulse is integral tau dt between the limits 0 to t, and when I do that integral, the total impulse I get is NABQ, where Q is the charge. So this is the most important point, what I have written in red color. The impulse, or if you want to be very, very specific, the angular impulse produces a change in angular momentum. Just like a linear impulse will produce a change in linear momentum, the angular impulse will produce a change in angular momentum. In this step 2, I have got a formula for the angular impulse. This is the angular impulse, whose value is NABQ. What is the effect of this impulse? The effect of this NABQ is to produce a change in angular momentum. So in my next step, I am going to write this impulse NABQ will be equal to change in angular momentum. So how do I write that? I write it like this. So that impulse will be NABQ equal to I into omega. Why I am writing only I into omega? Remember, I should have written I into omega 2 minus I into omega 1. I should have written like that. But I am assuming that initially the coil was at rest. Remember, initially the coil was at rest. So omega 1 is 0. So the moment you apply a torque, the torque will turn the coil, give it an angular impulse, and because of this impulse, the coil will start turning with an angular velocity, and the final angular velocity I will take as omega. Initial angular velocity is 0, so the change in angular momentum is only I into omega minus 0. So therefore it is only I omega. So that is very simple to understand, that since we have assumed the coil to be at rest initially, the change in angular momentum is nothing but I omega. So all that we have done is just recalled something that we learnt in first PUC. Whenever there is an torque acting on any body, the torque will produce an angular impulse. That angular impulse will produce a change in angular momentum. In this particular problem, we have calculated the angular impulse to be NABQ that you saw in the previous step. Angular impulse is NABQ, and I think I should have used the small letter n instead of capital N. Now I am using capital N. I will use capital N itself for the total number of turns. So I'm sorry, I made again a change in the symbol. I should not have made that. So I will continue to use small letter n only, so that there is no confusion. So this is supposed to be n only, because in my first slide I think I used small letter n for the number of turns. Yes, I have used n for the number of turns. So therefore the angular impulse is given by NABQ equal to I omega. Okay, so as the coil turns with this angular impulse, its velocity, angular velocity is increasing, so it will gain kinetic energy, and the kinetic energy will be half I omega squared. So what does this kinetic energy do? As the coil turns with this kinetic energy is used to twist the coil. It will twist the coil. So when it twists the coil, what will happen? Work is done by this kinetic energy in twisting the coil. When the coil is getting twisted, remember it is suspended by a wire. The wire also gets twisted. So as the wire is getting twisted, because of elastic properties of the wire, internally there will be another torque which will come into play, which will oppose this twist. And that is called the restoring torque. So this kinetic energy is completely used in doing work against this restoring torque. This is the work energy theorem. Again, PUC stuff. The change in kinetic energy is equal to the work done. So as this coil turns, the change in kinetic energy, which is half I omega squared, this complete kinetic energy is used to do work in twisting the coil. We can calculate the work done in twisting the coil. If the coil turns from an angle theta to an angle theta plus d theta, this theta is not the angle made by the normal to the field with respect to the normal to the plane with respect to the field. Please don't get confused. This theta is, you are having this wire and the wire is turning by an angle theta. I am using the same symbol theta, that's all. I could have used some other symbol, beta or something. So this is what you have to understand. You pass a current or a momentary current through the coil. There is a torque acting on the coil. This torque will turn the coil. Coil is attached to the wire, so the wire gets twisted. When the wire gets twisted, work has to be done in twisting the wire. And that work done is given by the formula C to theta times d theta. C is a constant for the wire. It is called couple per unit twist. 3-4 classes before this or 2 classes before this, I had explained this couple per unit twist. To twist the wire by 1 radian, how much is the couple that you have to use? That is called couple per unit twist. So C is a constant for the wire. It depends on the property of the wire. So to cut a long story very short, the work done in twisting the wire by a small angle d theta from an angle theta will be dw equal to c theta d theta. And therefore total work done is integral of dw from 0 to theta, which is c integral c theta d theta, or total work done is half c theta squared. So we have 2 formulas now. We found that because of the deflecting torque, there is an angular impulse, and this angular impulse starts to turn the coil. As the coil turns, it gains angular momentum and also gains kinetic energy. This kinetic energy is half I omega squared, and this kinetic energy is used in twisting the coil. This kinetic energy half I omega squared is used in twisting the coil and doing work. And the amount of work done is given by half of c theta squared. So from the work energy theorem, we know that the kinetic energy gained, which is half I omega squared, is equal to the work done in turning the coil by an angle theta. This is the funda that you have to understand. So ultimately what is happening here is, ultimately this is what is happening. When you pass this transient current through the coil turns by an angle theta momentarily, and because it turns momentarily by an angle theta, half I omega squared is equal to half c theta squared. The rest is just mathematics. Now we'll do some simple mathematics here. I omega squared is equal to c theta squared, that you can see from this equation. Half gets cancelled on both sides. So I omega squared is equal to c theta squared. And whenever a coil turns like this, the period of oscillation from rotatory motion is given by the formula T is equal to 2 pi root of I by C, where I is the moment of inertia and C is the couple per unit West. This is a standard formula that we know. Period of torsional oscillation. Period means time taken for one oscillation. That's given by this formula. If you square both sides, you get T squared is equal to 4 pi squared I by C. From this, if you work out what is I, moment of inertia, you get I is equal to cross multiply C T squared divided by 4 pi squared. So let's look at this equation. I is equal to C T squared by 4 pi squared, that is equation 6. Already in equation 5 we have I omega squared equal to C theta squared, equation 5. If you multiply equation 5 and 6, what will happen? On the LHS you have I omega squared into I, that is I squared omega squared. On the RHS you have C theta squared multiplied by C T squared by 4 pi squared, that is C squared T squared theta squared by 4 pi squared. So I omega squared is equal to so much. Now if you take square roots on both sides, you will get I omega, angular momentum in terms of couple per unit twist and time period and deflection theta. So I omega would be how much? It would be square root of that, square root of C squared T squared theta squared by 4 pi squared, which is nothing but C theta T by 2 pi, C theta into T by 2 pi. So this is the equation for I omega we got from the impulse formula. We already had derived, if you remember, if you go back to the first page, we had already derived here NABQ is equal to I omega. So if you compare this equation 3 with what we got now, 7, if you compare I omega is equal to C theta theta by 2 pi, I omega is also equal to NABQ. Equating the two, we can get NABQ is equal to T by 2 pi times C theta. From this, we get the charge. So now we know that the charge that passes through the galvanometer is given by this formula. If you can find out what is this CNAB, which is the constant, I will discuss this separately. If we can find out what is the time period T and theta, we can calculate the charge flowing through the galvanometer. That is the principle of the ballistic galvanometer. In this formula, this C by NAB, again everywhere I have used capital N, you can think you should use small n for the number of turns. Okay, I have used capital N because by habit I am using capital N. I think most textbooks nowadays use small n. So n is the number of turns. So in the next step you will see that C is equal to Q is equal to C by NAB into T by 2 pi theta. We will use small n here. Okay. So I'll use again small n. This Q divided by theta, which is the amount of charge to produce unit deflection, that is called charge sensitivity.